Good evening and a very warm welcome tonight for our artist talk about a very exciting project that was that happened in between December 2019 and October 2020. My name is Claudia Augustat. I'm the curator for the South American collections here at the Weltmuseum Wien in Austria. We have tonight a very interesting conversation with two wonderful women. And I first want to introduce our artist in residence, Veronika Szűcs. She studied art history and South Asian studies in Budapest, painting at the Academy of Fine Arts here in Vienna. And what I found very interesting, because I never thought about that it's possible to study this, she studied comic and illustration at the Academy of Fine Arts in Bologna. So that is very interesting. Her favorite artistic formats are graphic novels and artistic books. Her works focus on the personal experience composed like a travel book or journal. Our other guest, and this is maybe the big benefit when you are doing an online artist talk, you can invite people from all over the world. So it's a real pleasure that my dear colleague and friend, Beth Conklin, is joining us tonight. Beth is a cultural and medical anthropologist who works with indigenous people of lowland South America, especially in Amazonia. Her research focuses on anthropology of the body, ecology, religion and ritual, health and healing, death and mourning, and the politics of indigenous rights struggles. Her book, Consuming Grief, Compassionate Cannibalism in an Amazonian Society, which will play a small role in our conversation tonight, explores the transformational native cosmology that inspired the artwork from the Brazilian collections you can also see here in the gallery in our permanent exhibition. And I'm very proud that Beth was part of the team who organized this, a special part of the Brazilian gallery with me together some years ago. So yeah, it's great to have you here. Tonight, Veronika will give us a short presentation about her work and what she did as an artist of residence here at the Weltmuseum Wien. And then we will make a deep dive into one of the stories she selected for her guidebook. And this will focus on the Vari. And we are glad that Beth will share her experience with the Vari with us. You have the possibility to ask questions or make comments in the chat. You can do that at the end of the conversation, but if something came to your mind, just please free to post them in the chat. And at the end, we will try to answer as many questions as possible. So yeah, that's from my point. And I'm very happy to give the word to Veronika, so she can tell us a little bit more about what she did mostly in the lockdown time in our museum.
Yes, hello and good evening again. For those who just joined in, my name is Veronika Szűcs and I did a project at the Weltmuseum, a comic guide. First of all, I have to say thank you, and I have to send a big juicy kiss to Marisa Lobo, Katrin Seefranz and Juli Kra, the wholehearted workers of Kulturgamma, the logo of Kulturgamma you see here. This is a very important initiative of Vienna, funded by the city of Vienna, an initiative which supports migrant artists and artists who belongs to diverse minorities in Vienna, such as LGBTQ people and BIPOCs, and indigenous people. Yes, and all artists and people who deal with artistic research or artistic education who are underprivileged in the field of art and in other fields in Vienna. So yes, thank you again. In my case, the frame of my work was, as I told, a Kulturgamma fellowship, which was called by the Weltmuseum Vienna. They looked for department, a museums education department, who concentrates on visitors. And as I read this application, this call, I thought immediately, okay, this is something for me. Not just because I am doing comics, and comics is something very public and it's for visitors, but because I also have experience with experience with ethnology, let's say so, because I studied Indology and South Asian studies in Vienna and in Budapest, and so I have the background of cultural studies. I also have to admit at the beginning that initially I wanted to do another project. I wanted to focus on my favorite Archduke, Franz Ferdinand, who is part of a special room in the museum, which focuses on collecting practices, imperial collecting practices in the 19th century, especially centers on three Habsburgs who, let's say, pathetically, madly collected just things from all over the world, and who contributed a lot to the present collection of the museum. So that was my initial. The museum's education team, Petra Fuchs-Jewinger, encouraged me to go bigger, which I'm very thankful for, and she supported me. So she encouraged me not only to concentrate on one room, but on the whole permanent exhibition in the museum. Have the job, and I promised everything, and it turned out nicely, I think. So I decided to show 3 pages of my application for the Weltmuseum, because I did some special comics and nice pictures, especially decidedly for this application, and I didn't show them off before publicly, and now I enjoy it. I also did a very nice, I think, comic CV, which is full of Easter eggs for the Weltmuseum employees. So if you have time or if you have interest, I can share it with you. Maybe you find something. Yes, and it was, as you see, it was already later. It already laid the grounds for my comic. It already shows my style. It's already something in it which I continued through my project at the Weltmuseum, which was a comics guide, a visitor's guide. As I mentioned, I wanted to do something decidedly for the visitors. And yes, as I began to work in this fellowship, the big me was, and is still today, what is the duty or what is the mission of an ethnology museum? And I was confronted with this problem of the huge amount of objects which are collected from all over the world, and which are here and which we have to deal with. And I think it is a very common experience, not just for museums workers and museums, but also for visitors, that we have to deal with things. We have a lot of objects. I speak now about average Western privileged people. We have a huge amount of objects, and we have to do something with them. So it is a huge responsibility because it has also a lot to do with our current situation, climate situation, that we are just concentrating on property and on belongings. A nice solution for this problem. Yes, my suggestion is take your objects and build your own museum. And for this endeavor, you can, this is in this brief text in the first or second page of the comic book. In this endeavor, you can help yourself with the floor plan of the Weltmuseum. You can build a rack, kind of, Setzkasten, a rack of cardboard boxes, and you can put your dear objects in it. And this rack of cardboard boxes should have the layout of the floor plan of the Weltmuseum. So you already see that I can be hilarious. Yes, it was really important for me to maintain humor because hilariousness just breaks boundaries. But on the other side, also to address problematic topics and to be serious, to be provocative, but also for them who want soothing. And I hope that that I succeeded. From the beginning, as I was wandering through the rooms in the Weltmuseum, the note of mind, I can say, came to my mind, and this is the perspective. The comic book's title is Andersrum, which means the other way around, because I thought from the very beginning on that I don't want to make a visitor's guide which concentrates on the official opinions of the museum in the official or classical way of a guide, which is which talks about objects through the eyes of experts. What visitors the fear of talking themselves about things, because we all have our opinions and we don't have to be experts to have these opinions. So everybody who goes to the Weltmuseum, even if you don't know what Weltmuseum is, you can find objects and feel yourself immediately connected with them, and you can say you can have a connection, and you can say things about these objects which are true, and that was important to me. So not just letting experts speak about objects, but letting the objects speak about themselves, letting the objects speak about the experts, letting the objects let the visitors and about the museum and so on. And this is what I understand or understood as I told that perspective was a very striking topic for me. So this is the floor plan of the museum. You already see the objects which I selected. From 13 rooms, I selected 13 objects and wrote short stories about these objects. And now I bought a story which brings us a bit nearer to our topic today, to Amazonia. This is the room with the title Im Schatten des Kolonialismus, in the shadow of colonialism. As I worked about the stories, I always began with tour myself. Yes, let's say I remain till today a visitor of the museum. And then I asked Claudia to bring me to this room and, yes, entertain me. And then she told various stories about the displays and what I see, what we see there. And there was an object which immediately caught my attention. This is a European trumpet from Colombia, Colombia, and a magical instrument which has a really specific property. It is not allowed to see for all people who are not initiated. So basically all of us visitors are not allowed to see it. And so but the problem is obvious, how to deal with an object which is not allowed us to see. At the first I thought, okay, why is it not allowed to see? See this flute, because it should be dangerous. Then I thought, it's not that convincing. It's dangerous. It's just superstitions. They should exhibit it in the museum. Why not? Then again, we went to the bureau of Claudia, and Claudia provided a big fat folder to me with papers, with research papers about this, about the macunas, and which I read through, worked through, and then after reading all this heavy research papers, I was convinced, okay, this is the only one way to deal with this object, not to exhibit it. So this is an object behind the glass, an object behind the glass which is not transparent, which we cannot see, we can only hear the sound of it. And to understand better why I came to terms with this exhibiting practice, is I looked for an analogous thing in my life, and then I thought, okay, it's like a diary, a lot of diaries which I wrote, really private, and even after my death, even if somebody were interested in a diary to publish it, I would not agree to do this, because these are my deepest, my most intimate secrets, and I don't want to let it publish. So that was something which I could compare with this European flute. So briefly, I can show you the pictures about the story about this flute. This is about two ethnologists, the bad guy and the good guy, let's say. And it throws my experience on with this topic. At the beginning, there is the good guy who is slowly through the whole story comes to the okay, let's say that there are these two ethnologists, and they promised the macunas not to film and not to watch the ritual because they are not allowed, but they think, but they try to do it. They climb on a tree and try to film this ritual, and then slowly the younger ethnologist come to changes his mind and refuses to film the ritual. Or the camera, and the solution of the story is that the camera falls down, and there is this a little mammal, a Nasenbär, coati, I think in English, who snaps the camera and jumps away with it. So nobody films the ritual, and at the end, this the older ethnologist says, okay, is this everything ruined? Why did you come with me if you don't want to work with me? And then this guy says, maybe for keeping a secret. And this is what this display is about, for keeping a secret, I think. So basically, that's how my stories look like. And there is another room in the museum about Amazonia, which I also visited with Claudia, and it's very special for me because I began to work on this room immediately after we came back from the first Corona lockdown, and I was sure that I want to work with disease, which is something which is inseparably interwoven with colonialism and the whole globalism problem which we had to deal with in terms of conquer the pandemic. And then I went to Claudia again. I asked her for some literature, some research paper about these. Madonna, former director of the museum, who went to the Wari in the Amazonian rainforest. And then Claudia told me that I should read a special book which is written about this, about disease and death and American, South American society. And this was the book of Beth Conklin, which I borrowed from the library, and I read it in one night because it was so amazing. And now I think we can ask Beth about this book. Are you here?
Yes, thank you. It is such a pleasure to be here. So when this arrived in the mail, Veronika's astonishing book, I was absolutely amazed. I hope that all of you get to see this in person soon. So her work is fantastic, not just as art and not just as an incredible sort of alternative guide to the museum, but what surprised me was how insightful she was in tuning into the materials and their deeper meanings and the stories behind them. And I was so surprised at what she did with the Wari materials. So I want to talk a little about the story that Veronika focused on. But first, I would like to introduce you to the people we're talking about. The Wari are now a group of about 4,000 people who live in far western Brazil in the rainforest in villages scattered along rivers and streams there. So Wari were basically essentially isolated from the outside world until the 1950s and 60s. And the reason that the Weltmuseum has a collection of Wari materials, it's the only museum in the world that has pre-contact Wari materials, which is incredible. The reason, as Veronika says, is that a scholar from Vienna, a woman named Etta Becker-Donner, who became the museum director, developed a passion for South American Indians and for Amazonia. And she really wanted to be present at the first contact between an uncontacted group of people and the outside world. And she was very well connected socially and went to Brazil, and Harold Schultz, a German ethnographer there, told her that there was a group named, they were called the Pacas Novas then. They prefer to be called by their own name, Wari. But Harold Schultz told her that she should go to Rondônia and she might be able to make contact with Wari. So she made one expedition in 1954. And then she made a second expedition in 1956. In 1954, she found artifacts which she collected, but she did not manage to actually encounter Wari directly, although she and the men on her expedition came close enough that Wari, a group of, Claudia, I think it's 9 men emerged from the forest and shot a volley of arrows at her to try to obviously scare them away. If Wari had wanted to kill them, they would have been dead. But clearly Wari were just trying to defensively keep them out of the territory. And Etta Becker-Donner, this is one of my favorite stories. She was so passionate about making contact with Indians. She had learned a few words in a language that she thought was related to theirs. And so, whereas all the Brazilian men in her expedition ran in terror away from the Indians who appeared from the forest shooting their bows and arrows at her, Etta Becker-Donner ran towards them shouting, "Friend, friend, friend." And she talks about how 8 of the men melted into the forest, and the one who obviously was the leader of the war expedition looked at this crazy white woman running towards him. And she talks about how he was this gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous specimen of masculinity who stood there looking at her with his big bow and arrow pointed directly at her. He shook his head, fired an arrow that skidded into the dirt right in front of her, tossed his hair back, and disappeared into the forest. So like a good museum curator, she collected the arrows, which are now on display in the Wari exhibit in the Weltmuseum. So there's a wonderful story behind these artifacts. So that was 1954. When she returned in 1956, by chance, she showed up during the very first contact, which you see in this photograph here. The Brazilian man is Francisco Meireles, who was the leader of the expedition, and the Wari men are the ones who had come out of the forest to this first contact situation and were experimenting with things like clothing. And so she came back with some incredible photographs. So Claudia, do you want to say a little bit about the Wari collection? And could you also tell about the film that we found?
Well, I met Beth some years ago on a conference, and we had dinner together. And she said, "Oh my God, you are from Vienna. Have you ever heard from Etta Becker-Donner?" And at this time, I was very new in the museum. I said, "I'm not sure, but I can check in our database." And I really found it's not so much. I think it's around 50 or 60 objects, a lot of bows and arrows, and some objects which were left behind in abandoned villages, which she collected in 1954. But in 1956, when she was part of this group who made one of these first contacts, she also got some objects as a present from the Wari. And one of this is a very incredible object. I've never seen something like this before. It's called a peace stick. It's a little bit like an arrow, but instead of an arrow point, it is decorated with feathers and with the tail of this coati, so with some fur. And it's maybe a kind of invention to express that they don't want to make war anymore, but to want to be friends. And in 2011, Beth and we went together to the Wari to show them the objects from the collection, the photos, and to discuss this with them. And they also said they never saw something like this peace stick before. And so what I like is the idea that this peace stick is not only the only one in the museum, but it's maybe the only one that was ever made by the Wari. And when Beth came in, I think it was in 2011, Beth had the possibility to come for a research here in the museum for 2 weeks. And I think it was a really wonderful work what we did together. We were sitting, because Beth is not speaking or reading German at this time. And so we were sitting in my office, and we have a lot of manuscripts in the archive from Etta Becker-Donner. So we were reading the papers together. I was translating them, and at the same time we were discussing them. And so that was really a wonderful thing. And I remember that when I did a research about what we have in the archive, it came out that Etta Becker-Donner not only took photographs, but she also had a film camera with her. And I can remember that in the parking lot in the airport, I said, Beth, I have a special surprise for you. In 3 days, we are going to the film archive in Luxembourg, and we will see a movie, a film footage about this first contact. And it was amazing. I can really remember when we were sitting watching this movie together, and Beth was almost crying, because she said, it's amazing how healthy and strong and beautiful the Vary were at this time. Yeah. And so, yeah, that was maybe a kind of present I gave to her, and she gave a present back to me when she invited me to visit Santo André with her together in 2011 to talk with the Vary and to make also some interviews. And the first presentation of this material was in the exhibition Abenteuer Wissenschaft. That was an exhibition about Etta Becker-Donner. But I thought that this material is so amazing and important, because it's about this very special moment about the first contact, that I also decided to include it now in the permanent gallery. Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, when Claudia told me there's a film from the first contact, that was one of the biggest surprises in my life. And it was incredibly meaningful to see these first scenes from their encounters with the outside world. And what I didn't expect was how joyful and playful they were. The people who had come out of the forest were just fascinated with all of the clothing and the pots and the technologies of these friendly white people. And it was a very different picture of first contact, because I'm a medical anthropologist, and a lot of my work focused on documenting what happened to the Wari after that first contact, which was they got hit with epidemic diseases that absolutely devastated their population. A lot of my work went into documenting how bad that was, and about 3 out of every 5 people died in the first 2 or 3 years after contact. Now with COVID, Indigenous people all over South America who have this historical memory are saying, well, for you people, for you white people, maybe it's a novel virus, it's a novel coronavirus, it's a new thing. But for us, we have been hit time and again with an unfamiliar disease to which everyone is susceptible that has devastated our populations. So there are lots of historical resonances there. But it was really meaningful to see this film that Claudia had found, and to find out about the amazing materials that the Weltmuseum has. So this was the Wari in a picture from Etta Becker-Donner from immediately after the contact. And this is Wari today. They went through a very bad period with lots of disease and death, but they are very much on the rebound, and the villages are full of children and babies, and people are really thriving. So when we discovered the film and the photographs that Etta Becker-Donner had taken, one of the problems was that the audio narration for the film was lost, and Etta Becker-Donner's notes on the film were lost. And so we didn't know who the people, here's Claudia with the materials, with the artifacts. But we didn't know who the people in the film were. I felt like they looked really familiar, but had no way to know. And so we decided to make an expedition to the Wadi in 2011, as Claudia said, and try to take still photographs and find out who the people in the film were. Wadi are very sensitive about the use of images, and we didn't want to just randomly show the film until we knew who the close relatives of those people were, so that they could be present for this first time of seeing it. So we journeyed to the Wadi, taking pictures like this and asking people who they were. So here's a picture of Claudia working with Wadi, mostly children here, and asking questions. And this is me showing the still photographs to the gentleman on the left in the yellow shirt with the stripe, Touraine, and Wen Shao with the baseball cap in the center. And so one of the astonishing things that happened was that we discovered that the people who were in those first contact photographs were precisely the elder men with whom I had worked for 25 years at that point. And here you see Touraine showing his father, the very elderly man with the gray hair, is looking at a picture of himself as a young man in his late 20s, a picture taken by Etta Becker-Donner. And so Odo Iram, who at this point, Claudia, how old was he? Probably like 97 or 98, something like that. He lived to be 99.
Right. He was almost the same age like Etta Becker-Donner. Yeah.
Right. Yes. Yeah. So it was astonishing. So Wadi had no photography back then, of course, and for reasons that I'll talk about, they traditionally destroyed all traces of the dead, including photographs. So no one had ever seen pictures from that long ago. And here's Touraine seeing his father, who's sitting next to him, as a young man at this time. So this was incredibly meaningful, and we identified who the people in the pictures were, and we also recorded interviews. So one of the most extensive interviews we recorded was with Jimbo Maram, who is the son of Odo Iram and brother of Touraine. And it was such an interesting interview about his life from before the contact, through the contact period, and since then, that Claudia came back and turned it into part of the exhibit. Do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, what I was really fascinating by the interview, and especially sometimes you see that we are getting nervous when we have an interview or something like this. And Beth asked one question, and Jimon Maram talked for 1 hour. Yeah, because they are so exceptional good speakers and they know what to say. Yeah, and I thought that of course we need his own voice in the exhibition. And so what we did now in the permanent exhibition is that we use part of the manuscripts of Etta Becker-Donner and the interview of Jimon Maram to create a common narrative between the scientist and the indigenous perspective. And of course, at one point, Etta Becker-Donner is fading out of the interview because she left after 1956, and then Jimon Maram is taking over the narrative and is talking about the pandemic, the epidemics which came afterwards, and what this was meaning for the Wari, and also about our visit and the wish of the Wari to have a museum in the future.
Yes, exactly. So, which they are very, very interested in the possibility of collaboration. A lot of things are changing these days, and the young people, the children, don't know the old ways and the old stories in the depth that they used to. And so the elders are extremely interested in the possibility of bringing together curated materials and photographs and oral histories and creating a kind of local museum that would be for their own people and their own community, as well as a way to educate outsiders about the beauty of their culture. So Jimbon Maram, who is the centerpiece of the video in the museum exhibit, has been a very important teacher to me on many topics, but probably the most meaningful is on the topic of cannibalism. So Wari are now famous for having been the human group that practiced probably the most elaborate, most public form of ritual anthropophagy, consumption of human bodies, the latest in the 20th century. So until shortly after the first contacts, which lasted from 1956 to 1969, before the contact and for a while afterwards, the customary way of disposing of the bodies of almost anybody who died for any reason was to consume the body in elaborate funeral practices. Now, I was a vegetarian when I started working with the Wari, and this was not what I wanted to work on, but I'm also a medical anthropologist. And when I was interviewing people about those deaths that happened during the contact era epidemics, older people would oftentimes start telling me about the people who had died, and then that opened up into bigger conversations about their memories about the dead. And one of the things that came out, especially with older women, was that they oftentimes expressed a kind of ambivalence or discomfort with the fact that after contact, Brazilian government agents and Protestant missionaries had forced them to change their funerary practices and had forced them to switch to burial. Before that time, the customary way of dealing with the bodies of the dead was to roast and consume them. Let's see. So what I have here, so cannibalism ended in the 1960s. And a lot of my work, and especially the work of my Brazilian colleague, Aparecida Vilaça, has focused on reconstructing that system. And it's been extensively documented. This is probably the most extensive and most intimate understanding that we have of ritual cannibalism in the human record. But to be clear, this ended in the 1960s, and I didn't start working there until the 1980s. So at that time, all the middle-aged people and older had either witnessed or participated in the traditional funerals. So the drawing that you're seeing here was done by Jimbon Maram's son, Wem Curio, who was a young man of about 22 then, who really liked to draw. And he saw that I had a set of 5 primary color markers and some paper, and asked if he could borrow it, and said that he would bring me some pictures of things that were iri wari, meaning really wari. And I had no idea what he would come back with. But what he came back with was a set of drawings that included representations of cannibalism based on what he had heard from grandparents and elders in the group. So this shows the moment when the ritual preparations have been made, the special roasting rack and firewood you see in the upper corner. And at this moment, the men who have been chosen as special helpers are about to dismember the body prior to roasting it. So I won't go into a lot of detail here, although I would be happy to answer questions, but just some of the basics. So in the Wari system, which is specific to them, this does not represent cannibalism in other societies, but in the Wari system, one of the elements is that the body is believed to, it's imperative that the body should be consumed. It's an act of honor, it's an act of respect, and the most disrespectful, unloving thing that you can do to a human body is to put it in the dirt, to bury it in the ground. So for the Wadi, it's much more respectful to have the body disappear into the bodies of living people than to leave it to rot in the dirt, which is polluting and wet and cold. And to burial is something that no decent human being would do to someone they loved. So this is an act of love and respect. Another feature of the Wadi system is that you cannot consume the substance of someone who is a close blood relative. If you do, it's fatal. And I have cases of people who committed suicide purposefully out of grief by doing that. But this is a strong medically based belief. The people who did the cutting, roasting, and consuming of the body were in-laws, people related by marriage. And when you married into a family, one of the obligations that you took on was the obligation to perform this service for the dead in the family into which you married. So these are son-in-laws or brother-in-laws who have been called to prepare the body. The body, as you can see, is jaundiced and bloated. One of the unique features of the Wadi system is that they believe that you should wait 3 days in most cases before beginning to roast the body. So it was quite putrid by that point. It's the tropics, so high heat, high humidity, decay was definitely set in. And it was not a pleasant duty, but they believed that it was absolutely imperative for the body to disappear. It was really hard for me to sort of understand the emotional, psychological rationale behind that emphasis on cannibalism as a mechanism of eradication. And the people who helped me sort of break through to that understanding were Jimbon Maram and his wife Kimboin, who is one of my closest Wadi friends. And there was one day towards the end of my second full year of living with the Wadi, when I remember we were sitting out on the porch, and Jimbon Maram knew that I had been talking to elders, trying to understand the funerary practices. And he also knew that I was struggling with this. And so this is what he said. I don't know if you can understand this because you've never had a child die, but for a parent, it's a sad thing to put his body in the earth. We think about him lying there. We remember, we're sad. It was better in the old days when the others ate the body. Then we didn't remember our child so much. We didn't think about our child so much, and we were not so sad. So this conversation was the one that helped me to make the connection that for Wadi, the funerary consumption of the body was about loosening attachments. It was about trying to transform the ties of love and longing that bind the living to their dead loved ones. And this is very much at the center of the Wadi practice of funerary cannibalism. But then there's another question beyond that, which is, okay, why cannibalism? So the loosening of attachments has to do with ideas about the human body as something that connects us to each other. And the corpse, the body itself, is the strongest reminder of who the person was in life. And Wadi have a very sophisticated psychological model of sensory stimuli, memory, and emotion. And out of that sophisticated psychological model comes the imperative to remove traces of the dead. And so they no longer practice cannibalism. Now they have switched to burial that the outsiders imposed, but they still try to eradicate other traces. So after a death, they burn the dead person's house, they burn all of their possessions, their clothing. If a child dies, they go to the schoolhouse and ask the teacher for the child's papers and books and drawings, and all of that is burned in a big fire. Anything that can't be burned is given away to non-relatives. And then they try to transform the physical environment, the appearance of space, so that the people, the family who are grieving will not be constantly reminded of what happened in this place with the dead person. So they change village paths, they change the way that houses look, they go to the forest and they burn places associated with memory. It's very much a focus on transforming physical reminders of the dead. And those are not just visual, but also oral. They no longer speak the name of the dead person and so on. So for them, the eradication of the body was not, something in which cannibalism stood out as something apart from everything else, but it was very much part of this continuum of practices about eradicating traces of the dead. So then the final question, though, is like, why do it through cannibalism? Because cremation is just as effective at eradicating a body. And why do you recognize cremation as an acceptable alternative in cases when it wasn't practical or safe to consume the body? And so why not cremation? Why cannibalism? And so a lot of my work focused on trying to work this out. And the idea basically comes down to the fact that human relations with animals are at the center of Wari cosmology. As in much of Amazonia, this is a hunting society, and positive relations of exchange and reciprocity with the animal world are essentially the stuff of life. It's a very ecological idea that life is about eating and being eaten. We are all nourishment for other creatures, for each other. In the Wari system, this takes a special form in that this creature right here, this is a white-lipped peccary. It's like a wild boar, a wild pig that travels in herds of 100 or more animals who appear randomly, it seems, all at once. And white-lipped peccaries are extremely important in traditional Wari diets as the species that contributes the single most meat protein, but they're extremely important in spiritual and social terms, because when a Wari person dies, their human spirit goes to a realm that is under the water, where there's a parallel universe, a parallel social world in which the ancestors are human beings, vegetarian, but they're human beings living in community, and they still remember, the recently dead still remember their relatives on Earth, and they sometimes decide to go visit them. And when they go to visit them, they emerge from the water and take on the bodies of these creatures, these white-lipped peccaries. So when the herd appears, it's the group of ancestors coming to visit, to sing and dance for their living relatives, and to offer themselves to be hunted. So each peccary that is a Wari ancestor looks for a living human hunter who is a close relative in order to offer its animal body to be killed so that its meat will go to feed the family members it loves and remembers. And feeding and being fed is very much at the center of Wari family life. And so this relationship of reciprocity that develops between the living and the dead, the human and the animals, is a continuation of the bonds of love and nurturance that are the center of Wari's social life. So relationships with animals are at the center of this cosmology. And Veronika tuned in a very deep way to the cosmological, ecological, emotional dynamics of human-animal relations. And I was surprised and absolutely thrilled that from her reading of my book, she took from it one of my absolute favorite stories, which is the story of a jaguar that was killed by a Wari man.
Maybe this is a good point to come back to the graphic novel of Veronika, and maybe Veronika tells.
I have it here.
Actually, this man on the display on the first slide is Jimon Maran. This is the video which is displayed in the Brazil room.
Oops.
And yes, so this is the... So as I read your book, at the beginning, I was rather disgusted. I have to say, it's normal, it's human. Proceeded in your book, I came to a point. Then I completely changed my mind, and I just thought, yes, how can we be so cruel to bury our relatives in the cold and moist earth? This is the really disgusting thing. So now I think that the Wari cosmology is just beautiful. How they treated their dead relatives and kins is really logical way of make mourning easier. But the story which I illustrated is yes, how should I say? I did 4 pages which illustrate various components of the Wari cosmology, or the way of thinking. And one thing I wanted to illustrate is this which you call perspectivism, I think. And it's about the human and animal relations. At some point, as I was reading, I found this story about the jaguar and the hunter, and then I thought, okay, I don't have to think about anymore because it is a story that I have to illustrate. I modified it a bit. So in my reading, what happens is that this Wari hunter is killed by a jaguar. Yes. Then the jaguar takes a piece of flesh with it home to his family, to his jaguar family, and yes, they are all very happy about the meal. But in the meantime, the fellow hunters of the Wari find this the dead body of this man and chase the jaguar, and then they kill him and bring the head as a trophy back to the village of the Wari. And at the very bottom of the page, you see this funeral pile, which was clearly copied by me from this drawing which you showed us, because there was a little funeral pile drawing which you show. And this, I think it is in the book, in your book.
Yes.
Also, the hunter and the hunter and the jaguar side by side in the fire, as they go burnt. And on the very bottom of the page, in the very manner of the family of the man are assembled, the family of the Jaguar, who are mourning just and grieving just like humans do.
So this is what Wardis say. It's oral history. When you say, how do you know that animals are people? They tell you, well, there was this time when we were holding a funeral for this man who had been killed by a jaguar, and the jaguar's head was also in the body, in the village, and we were in a circle around the funeral grill, the pyre, and we looked up and we were surprised to see the jaguar's relatives walking into the village, and the jaguar's relatives began to hold a funeral for the jaguar in exactly the same way that Wari do, leaning on each other, crying, wailing. And so Veronika just beautifully captures this perspectivism, the fact that animals and people are human, though we see each other differently. And it's a beautiful representation of that, Veronika.
Thank you.
So should we go to the next one?
Yes. So what happens here? It's clear, we heard it before, somebody gets eaten, but I really didn't want to show it explicitly because, yes, for obvious motivations. And so I decided to make a loose connection between eating and death. And what we see is that somebody, obviously a human being, maybe, yes, a human being is eating something. So this is flesh. We don't know if it's the flesh of the huntsman, or it is the flesh of a jaguar, or if it is something other. But as we follow the way of this piece of flesh down, yes, there is liquid fire or something like this digesting acid in the stomach, and with fish bones and other things which this person ate. And there are some lumps already evolving and forming something. And if you watch with attention, then you see that there are two figures hugging, maybe a jaguar and a man, or like an embryo form of the both. And then on the next page, it's seemingly again quite disconnected from the first, but it is not. What we see is a human being diving into water, again water, and this concept of transformation. So the way of this transforming being is the same, goes the same route as the flesh, the piece of flesh on the previous picture, and it goes through, yes, so this curvy,
right, like this, right?
Yeah, this curvy way, and there happens transformation. This man dives into the water, then he become a jaguar. The jaguar chases a fish and catches it, and then eats this fish, and immediately there begin a new transformation into the fish, and this half fish, half jaguar creature with legs of a man again transforms into a fully developed giant fish, an arapaima, which again catches the sight of a human being. And on the very bottom of the page is a sentence, the only text in this part, which we cannot see now, but it's like du bist, was du isst. Du wirst zu dem, von dem du gegessen wirst. Du bist, is. In translation, You are what you eat. You become the person or the thing whom you are eaten by. You are, you exist, eat, therefore eat. And now, yes, I think that leaves a lot of room for interpretation, but okay, deal with it.
Thank you very much. That was really fascinating. And when I connected you some weeks ago, I thought that this was also maybe interesting for our visitors. And we already have questions. So the first question is to Beth, and I forgot to mention that Beth is working as a professor for anthropology at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee. So for her, it's still the morning. So the question for Beth is, do you have any recommendations for young anthropologists who are keen to do field work like you do? What are you currently working on?
Well, my recommendation for young anthropologists who are keen to do fieldwork is yes, do it. It's the most amazing thing that you can possibly do. I was very lucky to end up with the Wardi. They are some of the most beautiful, generous, kind people I've ever known, and I was incredibly privileged that they were open to welcome me into their lives. And I think that when I first started working with them, it was also a very good moment in that all of the people who were about 40 or 45 and older had grown up before the contact and had very clear memories of that. And so it was an incredible privilege to be able to learn firsthand from people about those ways of life before they entered into their relations with the outside world. And ever since then, it's been an equal privilege to see how they have adapted and what continues, what changes. They're strong people, and they intend to thrive. So I would say to a young anthropologist, yes, do it. I would say, though, that if you really want to learn, I think it's important to immerse yourself. For me, community-based ethnography it's very, very meaningful. And I think that I do other kinds of anthropology. I do media analysis, and I look at historical things and that kind of thing. But to immerse yourself in a community and to see how it works from the inside is very powerful, and something that we can't get otherwise. And I think one thing I would say is that leave your phone behind. Leave your internet connection behind as much as possible, because it's the direct engagement with people and really being present with them rather than distracted by the world news and all your connections at home. It's the direct engagement with people from which you learn the most about what it means to be human and what it means to live in community in their terms. Mm-hmm. So whoever that young anthropologist is, I would strongly encourage them.
I think that was the last thing what you said, leave your phone behind, is very important, especially in the time we are living now, because we are doing all these online things. And every time when I'm getting out of an online meeting, I'm missing the people, because then I'm sitting alone in my office. Yeah. And so it's a substitute. It's not it will never be a real substitute, and real people are very, this is what we need. So the other question is for Veronika. So why is the graphic novel guide called Andersrum? Which gallery of the permanent collection do you like most? If you have any favorites, please elaborate why you picked those gallery or galleries.
Ooh, lots of questions. So Andersrum means the other way around. And this is the title was suggested by one of the curators, and Gerard van Bussel, and Christian Schickli-Gruber was also fond of the title. So basically that was their idea, but I also liked it very much because it has to do something with this change of perspectives, which I try to explain at the beginning of my presentation, that it's seeing things from the other way around. I know that it has a very let's say sexy meaning or sexy undertone, because Andersrum also means gay, but it was not intended. Basically, every object which I played with is my favorite object. Can you hear me again? Okay. But I don't know if I have, it's not, I have to take it. And if I have any favorite.
In the meanwhile, I just let you know, in the meanwhile, I just let you know that we share in the chat the link where you can download the guidebook, but you can also pass by the museum and you can get your free guide book here in the museum. Then you have a real one. Okay.
Yes, come and take it. It is free. But at the beginning, as I went to the curators and asked them, I asked the same question: do you have any favorite objects? And the reactions was really diverse. So Claudia said, oh, of course, I have many favorite objects. And others says, no, it's not the thing. We are speaking about objects. It was really interesting for me. It's just like, again, the perspectives, how we deal with objects. Is it ethical to think about these very important, very meaningful objects as our favorite objects? Is it okay, or is it not okay? I don't know.
Was it difficult to work with the curators?
No. No, it was liberating, I have to say, because everybody, all of you, was very supporting, and yes, there's nothing to say. You were just friendly and provided a lot of literature, and we went to the permanent exhibition, but also we went to the storage in the basement, and it was very nice, I have to say. So don't be afraid of curators.
We don't right now. We don't have any other question from our audience, but Beth has one.
So Veronika, you were explaining something fascinating about a story about a bed in relationship to epidemic, and a very unusual way of working in which you worked with artificial intelligence to develop the story. What was that?
I can show it to you.
This is also one of my favorite stories in the guidebook, because I have favorites.
So on the right side, yes, this is again the display which we see in the China department of the museum with the title "The New Perception of China." And as I came back to the museum in June 2020, that was obviously the most important topic for all of us, the disease and the corona. And then I asked around how co-workers and curators and just museums employees think about it, that I should should write a story about disease. And I have to say, there was not that much applause. So I went to the China exhibition, and I discovered then on this paravent from the department of the Chinese empress are tiny, tiny bats. And bats were just very prominent in our discussions about Corona. So I decided to make a story about bats. And other thing was that China, yes, the other perspective of or the other perception, and the new perception of China was, I interpreted this title of the room as yes, something very modern, very new, the new era of technology, and I thought about. Yes, about the future. What are we doing after the apocalypse? If the technological development goes on, is it possible that a time will come when we cartoonists are replaced by artificial intelligence? And I followed this thought and found a language model, an AI, a robot, which is a philosopher AI program, which was fed by philosophical texts. And the aim of this AI was to make it possible to complete texts that way that it makes sense. I don't know if you get what I mean, but I was conversing with this robot. I made a conversation with this robot, and I asked him questions, provocative questions about disease, about bats, and he told me a lot of weird things. For example, yes, and then I collected this text and curated and compiled it to a story, which basically is the story about the bats in this Chinese paravent. But just imagine my experience with this AI. At the bottom of the page, the bat is says something which is in English. Humans tend to perceive themselves as the peak of evolution, but this is merely an illusion. Let's imagine now that you are dealing with an AI, and an AI says this thing, that humans are they are fancy for this thought that they are a peak of evolution, but this is just vanity. This is not the truth. And I have to admit that I got goosebumps as I got this answer from the AI, from this robot who says that humans are not the peak of evolution. Yes, and then the left page, it is a short comic, just 2 pages, and we go on with the bats, and we are talking about philosophical ways of existence, and basically who are the better creatures and more ethical creatures, humans or bats. And this is so funny because at the end the bat says, this is me in the picture. I say, yes, bats are clearly the better creatures, and maybe this is why they are the symbols of longevity and the natural death and health. And this is something which was just so important and so such like a joke in the middle of the pandemic to hear this.
Yeah, this is really an amazing story. We are almost at the end of our artist talk, but there was a last question just came in, a question for Beth. Why must grieving or memories of the relatives be hidden?
We are very concerned with the management of sorrow, the management of grief and mourning. And this is a very small society, and the loss of a loved one is devastating to people. And I said that they had a sophisticated model of human psychology. And in that understanding, if someone is constantly reminded of their loss, it's difficult for them to move on. They tend to dwell in sadness. And Wadi are very concerned to manage the emotions of grief. So they give people a full year to go into deep mourning and to grieve. But they believe that if people never move beyond that, they fall into depression, or what Freud called melancholia. And among the Wadi, people who are in that kind of deep sadness oftentimes stop eating, they stop drinking, and people do die. And so Wadi believe that it's important to help people eventually be able to let go of the power of those memories and to re-engage with social life. And so this is their understanding. It's very different from ours, where we try to hold on to every bit of memory, every photograph, everything associated with the dead. The Wadi impulse is different. It's not about holding on, it's about transformation. And so the relationship doesn't end, but it moves from being a relationship with the static image of the person who is gone to becoming a relationship with the person in the transformed state of being an ancestor animal. And that's a very positive, dynamic, ongoing relationship of the ancestors continuing their expressions of love in coming to feed living people. And so it's a cultural difference in emphasis, but they believe strongly that if you simply dwell in old memories, that it is a barrier to continuing to live and to develop other relationships and generative ways of being in the world.
Okay, thank you very much. I just want to say a big thank you for both of you. I would like to encourage our visitors who are now more interested in our work to come to the museum. The book from Beth, Consuming Grief, we have it in a library. Our library is a public library. When you are interested, you can borrow the book. And I think it's still possible to buy it. Yeah, okay. And so a big thank you for taking time tonight. It's this really beautiful night in Vienna. It's very hot. We have the first summer night. Come and take your free copy of the guidebook. Read Beth's book. And maybe one day when Beth is coming back to Europe, we can invite her also here to the museum again and join us. And Veronika, I hope that you will continue your amazing work. It is really, it's just a pleasure and just an inspiration to read the guidebook. And it also gives me new perspective on our permanent galleries. So maybe you two can just stay for a little moment in the meeting, and for the other people, have a great night, and hopefully the summer will stay. Thank you and bye-bye.